Drama and violence as Kenya picks its next president. William Rutto wins in a tight race, but his rival Raila Odinga rejects the result. I'm Scheaffer Okore, and today's newsmaker is Kenya's presidential election. The contest was close, the campaign was fierce, and once again the result was controversial. But a winner has been declared. This was the moment William Rutto became Kenya's president-elect.
I, Wafula Chebukati, chairperson of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, hereby declares that Rutto William Samoei of ID number 6847208 has been duly elected as the president.
Now, elections in Kenya rarely run smoothly, and this one was no different. The polls were close and tensions were running high. Soon they boiled over. Scuffles broke out as allegations of vote rigging were being bandied about. Even the Election Commission itself was divided over the result, with more than half refusing to endorse it.
We are not at Bomas of Kenya because we cannot take ownership of the results that is going to be announced because of the opaque nature which these results have been handled.
After the result, demonstrations broke out in several Odinga strongholds, and Odinga himself has announced he will pursue all legal options available to challenge the result.
In our view, there's neither a legally and validly declared winner nor a president-elect. Mr. Chebukati's announcement purporting to announce a winner is a nullity. He acted with gross impunity and in total disregard of the Constitution and our laws. He could have plunged our country into chaos had our supporters not exercised great restraint.
But President-elect William Rutto says the time has come to look ahead.
I want to promise all the people of Kenya, whichever way they voted, that this will be their government. I know many are wondering, especially those who have done many things against us. I want to tell them that they have nothing to fear. There is no room. There is nothing. There is no room for vengeance. There is no room for looking back. We are looking into the future. I am acutely aware that our country is at a stage where we need all hands on deck.
So, are claims of vote rigging justified? To debate that and more, I'm joined now by Joseph Ekhuya Simekha in Kisumu, Kenya, a political analyst and a strategist. And in Nairobi is Scheaffer Okore, a global development policy and governance expert and former vice chair of the Ekhuya party. Thanks all for being with us here today on The Newsmakers. Joseph, let me begin with you. The opinion polls were not on his side. The support of the incumbent president was not in his side, but William Rutto is still won. Tell me how and why.
In my observation, thank you for having me on this show. In my observation, he still won because his competition, including the president, underestimated his appeal across the country, and they also underestimated the people's anger against President Kenyatta. I think Raila Odinga has suffered the consequence of an association with a very unpopular president whom people are very angry against. And that is why, in my opinion, William Rutto still got the support of so many people around the country. It's really like a verdict on the outgoing president, much more than a comparison between the two candidates. So it's underestimating his appeal across the country.
Okay, let me add one more question here. Now, Raila Odinga is crying foul. He says that the results are not accurate. What do you make of that?
I've just followed his statement, but just before he issued that statement, 4 commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, who dissented last minute just before the announcement of the final results of the presidential contest, had also just issued a statement in which they were alleging that the chairman withheld certain data, certain information from them, did not allow them to participate in making the final authentication of the tallied results. And it seems to me that Honorable Raila Odinga has based his complaint on the allegations of the 4 commissioners. So if the allegations of the 4 commissioners stand the test of credibility, then Raila Odinga's allegations or complaint will have credibility. But if the allegations of the 4 dissenting IEBC commissioners, that is, those are commissioners of the Independent Commission, if they do not stand the test of credibility, then Honorable Raila Odinga's complaint will be a little problematic. It will be on slippery grounds.
Okay, let me just pick up on that, and Scheaffer, let me come to you now. I mean, if these concerns are justified, and if it is true that those election commission officers were not allowed to take part in the whole process, that does raise some very serious concerns about the whole electoral process, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. And it makes people wonder and start having questions. And, the questions that people are going to have now are not going to be good questions. They're not going to be questions that give people peace and also make people want to believe in the results that were announced yesterday, right? And we don't want those questions. I think so far IEBC has been doing really well. As somebody who was and participated in the last election in 2017 and comparing that with this election of 2022, there's so much redemption that IEBC had done in terms of their transparency, in terms of their accessibility. And I kept on saying, as long as we have more eyes on the election and the electoral process, we are much better off. And we had that until the very last minute. So we are hoping that these questions can be answered speedily, because we don't want to leave them hanging a lot, in the public, because also people get wary. People get angsty, people get asking questions that we can't answer, and then we just start looking at the results like, wait, is this really true? Is it not true? And then how long do we have to wait to find out? It's not a good place to be.
Okay, but this is something that I do not understand. I mean, 4 out of 7 election commission officers call the results opaque. What do you make of that?
I think for me, I want to see their workings, right? I want to see precisely what makes them call the results, or what makes them say that the process wasn't transparent. Because I think when they use the word opaque, they're trying to look for a word that is the direct opposite of transparent, which is now opaque. So then the question is, what makes you say this? Can this hold credibility? And if it does, then what are the next steps forward, right? And I believe from their statement just a few minutes ago, and then the statement from the Honorable Prime Minister Raila Odinga is now looking like it's going to be a court case, which I think is where everything should go, to be fair. And, his team, Raila's team, and Raila's people deserve and have the rights to go to court. I think the IEBC commissioners also really must show people their workings. I think that for me is the thing. I'm like, show us why and how we got here, so that people can understand, so that people don't jump into conclusions. I think that for me is the most critical thing.
Okay, jumping to conclusions, that's exactly what we are not doing here right now, because there are still many uncertainties revolving around the future of Kenya and the potential presidency of William Rutto. Now, it's clear, Joseph, at this point that William Rutto is going to face legal challenges. Expand on that for us. What could possibly happen at the court?
Thank you. If you please, may I just make a quick comment on the previous question you asked on these allegations by the commissioners? Kindly, please.
Sure.
Yes. One, they question the final tallies, but interestingly, they were involved throughout the process of announcing tallies from each of the 290 constituencies. In fact, they took to the podium one by one and participated actively in announcing these tallies. And our assumption is that it is what they, including those 4 commissioners, announced that was put together now as the final tally. So it would be interesting to hear from them ultimately on how come they were involved in announcing what they called authenticated results, and now they turn back and say, hold on a minute, this is opaque. The other thing, I've gone through their statement and seen some of their figures, their numbers, and they're a little problematic because they do reckon that the final tally shows that we have gone beyond 100% by 0.1 percentage points. And they equate that to, in their calculation, based on total number of votes cast, to 142,000 votes. That mathematics is wrong. What is right is just 1,420, not 1,042,000. So I think it's like some kind, it's going to be egg on the face for them. I have seen this in their statement. Now to your question.
No, but if I may interject, I would like to add one question here. Now, what you just said, if what you just said is true, and if this is how it worked, then what do you think it tells us about those 4 election commission officers? Were they supporters of Raila Odinga? Was that the case?
I wouldn't want to make an assertion like that. I do not know, if in their hearts that they are doing this in support of Raila Odinga. But I believe they would want to do their work and be seen to be credible managers of our elections. Elections are very extremely sensitive in this country, and I believe those are ladies and gentlemen of sound mind, that they would not want any blemish on their names, on their reputations, just because they took a position that could be interpreted as supporting one of the candidates. What I'm worrying more about is what they are putting out to us, regardless of what is motivating them. They may have very legitimate motivations, but they better put out to us things that we can question, subject to the test of credibility, and they pass that test of credibility.
Okay. Okay, now I would just like to repeat what I asked you earlier. Now it seems likely that these results are going to be challenged in the court. Tell me what kind of legal challenges do you think William Rutto could face at this point?
I absolutely agree with my colleague Scheaffer Okore that Raila Odinga and his coalition have every right, if they are dissatisfied with the results, to go to court. We have that provision, and that's the best place to head, nowhere else. When someone disputes an election, the best place to head is the Supreme Court. That's where the presidential election can be challenged. So I presume they are going to mount a petition at the Supreme Court, and that's what William Rutto will be responding to. I presume from what I heard Raila Odinga say, their case will hinge on what these 4 commissioners have said. But perhaps there's other evidence that maybe they will bring on the table, because Raila Odinga said in the press conference that he does not want to reveal their total strategy at this point. So in summary, Supreme Court petition.
Okay, now, Scheaffer, let me come to you. Now, yesterday, right before the announcement of the results, we did see scuffles taking place in Nairobi. While there were celebrations after the results, there were protests in some parts of the country as well. Talking about the legal challenges and the legal proceedings, what kind of impact do you think those legal proceedings could have on the country? Are you concerned that the legal proceedings could possibly trigger some sort of civil unrest in the country?
Not really. I think when you talk about violence, specifically when we're talking about the Kenyan election, as of what we've seen before, we have to speak about it in the context of what is happening at that particular moment. And I just want to just go back a bit to what you were talking about in terms of yesterday when the announcements were made and there were protests, etc. And we were following that with a lot of people on the ground, and a lot of those what we are calling violence or bouts of violence were not really violence or protests per se. There were people who were feeling grieved and mourning, so they lit a tire and they were driving their motorcycles faster than they usually do. And they were making noise in the streets, which I believe they are very much within their rights to do. The same way the people who are celebrating, who have very much the right to be joyful and to celebrate their candidate winning, making noise, driving their cars, honking their horns. Everybody has a right to do that. I think the context within which we discuss violence, especially violence within the political engagement or the political process of Kenya, is wanting. That being said, I am not really worried of civil unrest. I think civil unrest is a very heavy word for Kenya and Kenya at this particular point, because then it doesn't lean into historically what has Kenya learned historically, what are the people doing now, who are the people in terms of the demographic that we are dealing with, right? The voters now and the issues now and what the country is experiencing, right? So I think when we talk about the violence and civic unrest, I'm not really concerned. I think my concern is I want the person who's won this election to win it fairly. I want the person who gets to run this country to run it knowing that the country is in a state of angst when it comes to its economic recovery. I want the next leader to understand that the country is equally split in between the people who support Raila Odinga and the people who support William Rutto. And I want that leader to understand that all these people are valid in terms of who they support and that the unity of this country is most important than the politics, right? So those are my concerns beyond the civil unrest. I think people are more concerned about bread and butter issues. People are concerned about health. People are concerned about how do they recover from an already failing economic country to a country that has been going through COVID and hasn't recovered from that, and then getting into a political season and trying to come out of it. And now we are seeing all of these issues coming about. So I think that is more of my concern other than the civil unrest. I think the hope or the expectation that we'll jump into violence is a bit worrying for me.
Now, Scheaffer, according to many analysts, Kenya is going through a polarized structure at this point, which has only gotten worse, especially during these elections. Do you think William Rutto is someone who has the capacity and the capability to unite the country?
I think he can, and I think he has the capacity. I think my questions then, or like my answers, will be targeted towards the bigger context of what is really possible. Because I know that what he needs to have is a long-term and a short-term solution to how does he start reuniting a country, right? That the other half, of course, chose Raila Odinga, and then the other half chose him. So then my questions are, how does he start doing that? What is he going to put in place? And then it goes back to his manifesto, and how do we start looking at how does he become accountable, Which teams is he going to put in place? How is his cabinet going to be composed? Is it going to be composed of the women that he had said is going to be composed of? How does he bring in young people? How does he bring in the people who are, living with disability? How does he basically put together a structure that starts demonstrating inclusivity of other people and not just the people within his team already? I think that is something that any leader is capable, beyond just Rutto. I think any leader is capable of doing that with the right will and with the right team. I think he is very capable.
Okay, so as I understand, you were saying that the effectiveness of his performance as the president of Kenya will depend largely on how he resolves grassroots issues facing the country. Joseph, would you agree?
Yes, I'm in absolute agreement with Scheaffer that he is capable of uniting the country. He has demonstrated the energy that a leader would need to go around and appeal to different sectors of the population, appeal to their concerns. He has demonstrated that. And given the fact that he has been profiled so negatively by the outgoing president and his corner, I am sure he'll be wanting to demonstrate the opposite, to demonstrate something different, to demonstrate that he's a leader who is there for all Kenyans. I have had the privilege of listening to him close hand, one-on-one, speaking to him and asking some of these questions. And I know that he will likely be wanting to do that. That is demonstrate that he is not the ogre that he's been profiled to be in the court of public opinion, but is a leader who is eager to demonstrate to the public that he will serve Kenya for the best of Kenya and not just for his self-interest.
But is it likely for him to do all of this while sticking to the same alliances which are present in the country right now? Or do you think he would have to change the alliances again, like we saw happen a few months ago?
By the way, he is not in the same alliance as the president of the country. He has a different alliance, with some other leaders. I'm hoping that let's assume that we will have a presidential election petition at the Supreme Court, and perhaps let's say that he gets confirmed as duly and validly elected, that I'm hoping that he will reach out to the other alliance, that is the competitor alliance, and ensure that he offers them a hand of peace and requests that they have a duty, all of them, to work together for the good of Kenya. I know that given the circumstances in this country, given the history of disputed elections, he will likely want to do something like that. Not on similar grounds like the famously so-called handshake, but just wanting to demonstrate that, look, we have a duty to Kenya, but not to ourselves.
Okay, now, Chef, I'm basing this question on the fact that Raila Odinga was able to secure about 49.5% of the votes in the presidential election. So certainly he still enjoys a lot of support from within the country. Tell me, how do you think William Rutto can appeal to the supporters of Raila Odinga?
I think he said this yesterday in his press briefing when he was talking to the press, if I'm to call it a press briefing. And by he, I mean the president-elect, Mr. William Rutto. He said that he is very open to working with Raila Odinga as a leader of opposition, and also so that the broader opposition and not just Raila himself.
If I may interject, but do you think Raila Odinga is someone who is open to work with him?
I think Raila has worked with many leaders before. It's not just Rutto, right? Like if you follow Kenyan history, Raila has been working with a lot of leaders, so it's not just Rutto, right? So I think right now what I wanted to say was that Rutto has alluded to this, that he's open to working with him so that his government or his regime has somebody to keep him on check and to keep his team and his people on check. So I think that's a good sign. The other thing that I wanted to also acknowledge is that Rutto has done really well as a political person and as somebody who can teach this country a different way of also engaging in politics, because I don't think there's ever been a deputy president who's been able to make the pivot to presidency, right? Despite whatever is happening. So all factors constant. I think he's a fantastic political person. I think also in him, there's a lot of capability in terms of him being a statesman and a leader, like Simekha has said. I think there's opportunity for him working with Raila if it gets to that. Raila is also equally a statesman. Raila has done this before. This is not new to him. So this of working with people who are seen as his enemies or his nemesis is not really new. I think then the question is it possible at this point? I guess we wait and see what happens with the elections now that it's being disputed. The results that is. So then once that settles, we are going to see what will happen after that. But I think it's very possible for the two of them to work together. It's not going to be the first time, I believe.
Okay, so right now we are going to see what happens in the court. Now, Joseph, let me ask you, once the court decides and if it rules in favor of William Rutto, do you think these presidential elections effectively mark the end to dynasty politics in Kenya?
Hilarious question. Yeah. Well, I have no way of telling that some other people who have been part of what we, in ordinary parlance, call dynasties may pounce back, pounce at the leadership of the country, maybe after Rutto or even with Rutto. I think it beyond what we are calling dynasty actually is just an elite problem, a problem of a small elite having a stranglehold on to economic and political power in Kenya for private gain. Now, it just happens that a majority of this elite are from families that have been in political and economic leadership of the country since independence. It may now, let me just talk about my observation, my thinking, this may well mark that end because it happens that that clique mostly coalesced around the candidature of Raila Odinga, led by Uhuru Kenyatta, and did not want to see William Rutto succeed Uhuru Kenyatta. So it may well be the end if William Rutto decides that I have to dismantle this stranglehold on Kenya's economic and political power by this small clique that did not want anyone else to lead the country. Now, I think let's watch and see what happens. There's that possibility. He may actually want to completely dismantle that which sometimes we call cartel that has a stranglehold on economic and political power in Kenya.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Joseph, I'll have to give you the last word. Joseph, Scheaffer, thanks very much for talking to us here on The Newsmakers, and thank you for watching. You can follow us on Twitter and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Scheaffer Okore. See you next time.